Okay, good morning. Now the chief's vanished.
We can start.
Okay. I'd like to call the Accommodations Steering Committee meeting underway this morning. Any conflicts of pecuniary interest from any board members? Not seeing any. First item of business is the minutes from the last meeting, which was held on May the 10th. Could I have a mover and seconder to put that on the floor? Moved by Member Bonham, seconded by Member McKendrick. Any items from the previous meeting minutes for discussion? Not seeing any. Show of hands in favor of the minutes. Thank you. That deals with that item. Next item is a report from the region, item C2 or item 2 within the package. It is a update from Mislof. I will ask through Deputy Chief Forty if Mislof would like to present that. Okay, thank you. Mislof, just any comments? I mean, I think it's reasonably self-explanatory. I will comment that the schedule was put out to members as a confidential item. So if you wanted to make any verbal comments, that would be acceptable.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, the memorandum is very short, self-explanatory. The one item I did want to discuss is just the schedule. In discussions with the consultant and preparing the contract documents, they've identified that they need some additional time to complete those contract documents, approximately 3 additional weeks from what was originally contemplated. So the effect on the schedule essentially bumps the schedule, all elements in the schedule, approximately 3 weeks, and one key item there is it bumps us to the next cycle of committee and council for the tender award approval. And that ends up being the last committee meeting before, last committee meeting of the year. So we anticipate having the tender go out on the street August 8th, and if provided everything's within budget, the tender award report would be going to council on October 4th for approval. That was the main item from the memo I want to highlight. And as well, there's some other items, the pre-qualification for general contractors, that closed. We received 6 submissions. Those proposals are being reviewed right now, and we anticipate having a short list of general contractors who are going to be invited to bid on the tender, selected by June 22nd. And we received a 50% cost estimate on Friday. That's just a draft format that's being reviewed by the project team, and once that's finalized, I can provide on where we are with the budget with the 50% cost estimate. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them on the memo.
Thank you. Committee members. Member Gale.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Deputy Forty, to Mislof. I have a question about the tariff things going on with the United States right now. And we have $17 million to build this police station. Our hats say community on them, but we also have to provide adequate and effective policing. So I'm giving you, I want your opinion, number one, on where this is going with the cost of building this, or could we be in for a nightmare? That's number one question. Number two, if our tender, we're hoping it comes in about 17 million, if it came in at 25 million, because of something like this, what is our recourse? And because we have to provide adequate and effective policing, maybe it's something that shouldn't be discussed right now. We're hoping for this to be done because it's been covered a lot of time, but I'm just wondering, is there a plan C for doing this a year from now when we hope the world has become a better place than what it is right now with regards to our relationship on the steel and things like this? So if you can understand what I just said, please comment.
Through the chair, in terms of the steel tariffs, I can say that's definitely having an impact on the budget. Our design development budget, which was issued maybe a month and a half ago, that accounted for some steel increases. I think I mentioned in my last update that it accounted for like a $280,000 increase in our budget construction cost estimate. So just because of steel prices, we realized about $280,000 effect. And on this draft budget that we just received on Friday, I looked at the steel prices again, and the unit rates have gone up again. now that the tariffs are in effect, and it was a $100 difference in a couple of months, just on steel prices alone, on our construction cost estimate. So it's definitely having an impact on the budget. How that's going to look in August, September, when we go for tender, I'm not sure, when we go to market. But it's,
So a follow-up to that, and my question about, let's say it goes absurd. I think the council will understand, and the chairs here, if it goes up a few $100,000 because of this. The council won't understand if it goes up $5 or $6 million as a result of this, and maybe I'm just pulling numbers out of the air. But, so are we tied to a tender? And that's what I was told in the beginning of my term as a regional councillor. We're tied to tenders once we put out there, but I don't believe we are if it goes way above what we can afford. And let's say the Burgoyne Bridge, I don't want to go in that one, but if we tender for 17 million, it comes back at 25 million. I'm just throwing a number out there. Are we tied to that? Or can we back off and say, hey, we got to take a look at this?
through the chair, once we go out for tender, that's basically our contract day. When we issue a tender and contractors provide prices, they've sort of responded to our request for tender. That's a contract. So technically, we are obliged to award if that's our intention. Whether it's 5 million, I can't. I know you're just picking that number. That's a very high number. I think we're going to have a good idea of where we're going to be before our pre-tender cost estimate. I anticipate that the prices will come in at or slightly below that pre-tender cost estimate, because our pre-tender, our estimates are sort of an average of what we expect the prices to come in at. It's not necessarily representative of the low bid. So
okay, the main reason I'm putting that out there is just because then I might have to turn to the chief and say, can you wait a year for the Trump issues to be solved, or for us to be in better shape for this? And I know he's going to want adequate and effective policing, but that's when I'm using my smiles.
Through the chair, I can answer that, but in a year from now, we don't know what other impacts we'll have over the year over year. We do see construction escalation, so typically it is more expensive. Things go up, salaries go up, so we do see a construction escalation typically in the market. So by waiting a year, maybe the steel prices will come down, but maybe some other material prices will go up, so we can't really predict that.
Okay, I made my point. Thank you.
Member Caslam?
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, to the presenter, I'm struggling with the schedule slip so early in the process. You know, we've been accused of this in a lot of projects that we do, and we're trying to get better at it. So I'd like to drill down just a little further into what can we do to mitigate the schedule slip so that we can get back to the original schedule. You know, Mr. Chair, it's a problem for me because being a project manager for 40 years, I get what's happening here and I understand the process. What's missing here for me is the reasons why and the mitigating steps that were taken to try and get the schedule back on track.
Through Mr. Chair, when we first issued this schedule at the start of the project, we identified it as being very aggressive with very tight timelines. The reason we were doing that is because we knew we were running up against the election this year, and our last opportunity to go for tender award to committee and council would be in October. So it was identified that we were dealing with a very a tight schedule, a very aggressive schedule. And we've been keeping our dates up until now for the most part. This recent schedule slip, I believe what accounted for that was our design development cost estimate when it first came in at 1.5 million over, and then we reviewed it, ended up coming down to approximately 300,000. We had a pause there for a minute. We didn't want to keep advancing the drawings if we had a issue with our budget. So there was a bit of a delay there. And the consultant as well identified that they need a few more weeks to prepare the contract documents. And I think we can learn from this job. The headquarters project, we did go out to tender. There was a push to get the the drawings out to market, and they probably could have used some more quality assurance reviews. So I think the 3 weeks at this point is time well spent to make sure that the drawings are checked and reviewed and to mitigate any delays and costs once construction starts. So
Mr. Chair, I hate to do this, but I have to. I'm going to keep drilling down until I can get to a response I'm looking for. There are 24 hours in a day, there's 7 days in a week. What is the consultant currently working?
sorry, can you repeat that? What is the consultant
So
currently?
there's 24 hours in a day, there's 7 days in a week. You want 2 more weeks. Exactly what is the consultant doing, and how can he fit that into perhaps working 2 shifts a day, perhaps working extended schedules? How can we get this, how can we get the timeline? It seems like that I want to make sure that the timeline is the most critical aspect of what we're talking about in this conversation, and how do we get that timeline back on track?
I think the key here is pulling the 3 weeks back and going back to the original schedule.
That's what I'm
That's the
trying to
bottom
get
line.
to. And if I have to ask, you know, how many shifts he's working, how many hours a day he's working, how many people are on the job, then I'll ask those questions. Right now, I don't have any of that detail, but I want to know what mitigating steps are being taken to bring that schedule back in line. So through you, I'll ask what's happening.
Through the chair, I don't have the details on how many staff internally are working on it, how many hours they're putting towards the project. But I do know they are working on it diligently. We are meeting with them on a regular basis, reviewing updated progress sets. I can follow up with the with the consultant to try to get more details exactly on how much time is being spent on it, but they are well aware of our time constraints and that we are trying to get this awarded prior to October 4th.
Well, Mr. Chair, that ship has sailed if we accept this report. I'm not ready to accept this report. I don't think any of the questions have been asked that need to be asked of the party that's creating the delay, and I think we need to get back into their office, and if it takes providing them with resources, or you know, what do we need to do to assist them in getting back into the schedule that we've agreed on? What do we need to do?
Just to clarify on process and that, the service obviously is a key component of this, and obviously has delivered over the months its design requirements. If I look at all the different components to this, has the service contributed all the material necessary for the design of this building?
Through your chair, yes, that would be accurate. Right at this point, all the major design decisions have been made. At this point, it's sort of the grunt work of the drawings, working out the details and sections and all the components of the contract document package.
So then the second piece, then, from a region's perspective, any design requirements from the region, they've all been contributed and signed off. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've been providing comments on all their progress sets. They're not waiting for any information from us.
Okay, and the third piece is any of the site requirements that were dictated by the city, setbacks, where the building sits on the lot, and all of that. Has all of that been, again, communicated to the firm that is doing the design work?
Through Chair, we received comments from the City of St. Catharines yesterday afternoon in regards to the site plan application. So we do have all their feedback now, and we are addressing any comments they have. They're all minor in nature. There's no issues there.
Mr. Chair, I have no choice but to refer this back to staff as an unacceptable timeline, and because in light of the questions you've asked, it doesn't seem to be enough evidence to show that a delay is warranted. And I think to send a message that it's important that we meet our timelines based on cost, based on timing, and in our case, based on schedule because of the political landscape that's taking place. I think we need to, I'd like somebody to refer this back to staff, suggesting that the timeline needs to be pulled back in line. Since I have talked to it, I can't, but I'll. I thought I can't, but somebody else can make that because I've already spoken to it.
I would have allowed it because you were only talking about referring it with your questions.
Fair enough. If it's allowed, then I'll make that referral.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is it's referred back to staff to tighten the time frame, pull out the 3 weeks, get back on the original schedule.
Thank you.
Seconded? Show of hands in favor? Okay, so that matter has been dealt with. Member Bonham.
Can I just make I have a question and a couple of comments, not with regard to the motion, but am I to understand that once we tender a contract for a build, that we must accept any of the bids, or must accept one bid? We can't walk away from the project and say that the cost is excessive and we're going to come back in a different climate and tender it again? Are you saying that once we go out, am I to understand we have to accept whatever comes back in?
And if I might add into that, that's the conversation I had about the Burgoyne Bridge when that started, the hullabaloo about it 3 years ago and I said, do we have to accept a tender? And they said, yes. But then I said, what happens if it's totally unreasonable? What happens if you have a thing for $1 million, it's $100 million? Do you have to accept it? And they said, well, there might be other mitigating circumstances. Okay, then I guess we don't have to. Please.
Through the chair, my only caution would be if you cancel the tender and you went out to tender it again, you'd have to tender it out something that's significantly different. You couldn't go tender the exact same project out at a later date to see what the prices would be. I think that would be considered price shopping, and I don't think procurement would be in agreement with that. So we can't cancel a tender and just go out a few months later and tender the exact same project. So I think there'd have to be some significant changes to the design.
Thank you for that. Next question would be, what's the degree of confidence in the scope based on what we're doing? Like, is this number going to be plus or minus 10%, 15%, 30%? Where are we with regard to degree of confidence?
Through your chair, right now the 50% cost estimate is considered a Class B estimate, which is plus or minus 10%. So as the drawings develop and we get more detail on the drawings, our design contingency sort of reduces and that accuracy increases. So our pre-tender cost estimate, which is based on the 95% contract document set, would be accurate to plus or minus 5%. Yes.
And lastly, with regard to Chair Gill's issue with regard to steel and tariffs and all that kind of stuff, would Canadian sourcing only alleviate the tariff concern for the product, for the steel?
Through the chair, I'm not sure procurement would allow us to put that type of condition in the tender documents. I could follow up with them, but I believe the market would dictate where the contractors would be purchasing their steel from. So if Canadian sources are cheaper than American sources, then that's where they would source their steel. So I believe we'd let the market decide where the contractors decide to purchase their steel from.
Well, my spin on the current TIF is if it's imported, it's tariffed. If it's not imported and it's home sourced, where would the tariff consideration come into it? I'm loath to understand that.
Through the chair, I'm not sure if all steel required for the project can be sourced in Canada. It may have.
Get rid of 3 weeks and buy it home, you know? Christ, if this was Trump, you'd be executed already, right? For suggesting we're going to go offshore for any of it. Are we? I'm sorry. But in any event, I think we want to make our best effort to home source the steel to avoid any consideration of tariffs and costs that are going to be driven up. Thank you.
Member Bonham. Sorry, Member Stewart.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, that as far as sourcing of any materials for the building, that would be up to the people putting in tenders as to where they're going to get their materials, and that would affect the amount of price they could tender for with it. Am I understanding that right? I don't have the building experience some other board members do, but would that not be correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. The general contractor would go source the steel where they're going to get the best price from. So if that's Canadian steel, then that's where they would source it, I'm sure.
So, in other words, with anything in any of the projects that have been done, has there ever been a dictation of where you buy something, other than perhaps an assumption of the qualified bidders that they're going to try to get? I mean, their margins are based on them getting the lowest cost inputs for their tender price. I'm wondering, is this tempest in a teapot?
Through the chair, in terms of single sourcing, it does happen on occasion in the tender documents. For instance, if we need to integrate the security system into our security system, then obviously we have to sole source that, so it all integrates together. But typically, the specification is based on a certain product, and then there's 3 alternates typically that are provided as acceptable alternates that they can choose from.
Thank you for that.
Just to add some comment, I remember during construction of headquarters when Gary Burrows was the chair of the region at the time, there was a discussion at this table regarding trying to source some of the subcontractors to Niagara firms. I remember that. I think especially in some of the areas of drywalling, electricians, plumbing, and et cetera, et cetera. As you know, the actual contractor was a multinational that built us. But I don't think there would be anything if the region took it under advisement going forward, because it is their contract that goes on the street, to put in a clause, which I would probably see, I would say, if we were a company in Alaska, as an example, would be able to say, and it sounds like we wouldn't be able to say in there, we want a Canadian source steel product. So we're not obviously obligated to say that, but that would be a nice nationalistic way to go. But maybe all it's doing is inflaming the rift between our two nations at our present time, which may eventually subside. So, Member Caslin.
As much as I would love for all the trades and all the work and all the materials to be sourced within Niagara, that's not possible within the procurement policies of the province.
Anyway, any more discussion on this one item? We've made a motion to refer it, so I don't think we need a motion to receive it, do we? We've already received it? Okay. So, any new business in the area of construction one way or another? Not seeing any, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.